Kate pulled her coat tighter as she hurried down the quiet street. The night air was heavy, pressing against her skin, and the yellow glow of the streetlights did little to break apart the shadows between the houses. Her own home stood at the end of the block, a 2-story wooden house, old enough that the floors creaked with every step, but familiar enough that she had always felt safe inside. She slipped her keys into the lock, the click of the tumblers strangely loud in the silence. The doors swung open, and the faint smell of dust and wood greeted her. With a sigh, she closed it behind her, bolting it out of habit. She tossed her bag onto the hallway chair, kicked off her shoes, and made her way upstairs. It had been a long day at work, and all she wanted was the comfort of her bed. She brushed her teeth, changed into an oversized shirt, and slid beneath the covers. The clock on her nightstand glowed 11:47 p.m. She closed her eyes, listening to the distant hum of the city and the old house settling around her. That was when the sound came, a knock soft, deliberate against the front door. Kate's eyes opened instantly. She held her breath, straining to hear again. Maybe it was her imagination. Maybe it was just the woods shifting in the cool night air. But then it came again, clearer this time. Knock, knock, knock. She sat up in bed, her heart picking up its pace. Who would come this late? For a moment she considered ignoring it. Then, as if to push her past hesitation, a voice followed. Kate. Her name. Spoken low, almost in a whisper, as though someone stood with their mouth pressed against the door. Her body stiffened. She knew that voice. It was familiar, intimate. It was her brother's. Daniel, she whispered into the empty room, though she knew he couldn't hear her. He was away hundreds of miles from here on a business trip that had only started 2 days ago. He had called her yesterday from his hotel. Slowly, she slipped from her bed, feet cold against the wooden floor. She forced herself to move to the window, pulling the curtain aside. The street below was still. No cars, no footsteps, no sign of anyone standing at her porch. Only the faint outline of her front step lay in the dim streetlight. The knock came again. Kate, let me in. Her chest tightened. It wasn't possible. It sounded exactly like Daniel, but he couldn't be here. She reached for her phone, her hands trembling, and dialed his number. The line rang twice before he answered, his voice clear, groggy but warm. Kate, everything okay? Her throat went dry. Daniel, are you at my house? A pause, then confusion. What? No, I told you, I'm in Chicago. Why? What's wrong? Her knees weakened, and she sat on the edge of the bed, clutching the phone. There's someone at the door. They're knocking. They sound like you. For a moment, silence stretched across the line. Then Daniel's voice came sharper, awake now, urgent. Kate, listen to me. Don't open the door, do you hear me? Don't open it, no matter what. The knock came again, harder this time, as if in response. Kate pressed a hand over her mouth. They're still here. Call the police, Daniel urged. I'll stay on the phone with you. Just don't go near the door. Her eyes darted toward the stairs. The hallway light flickered faintly, though she couldn't tell if it was her imagination or a trick of her tired eyes. She took a slow step backward away from the sound, but then froze. Because the voice spoke again, closer now. Not muffled through the door this time, but inside. Kate. Her breath caught in her throat. Slowly, she turned her eyes toward the crack beneath her bedroom door. There was a shadow moving there, a faint outline shifting back and forth like someone pacing in the hallway. Her brother's voice, calm and coaxing, slipped through the silence. It's me. Don't be afraid. Just open the door. Kate's pulse pounded in her ears. Her brother's real voice, sharp and worried, shouted from her phone, "Kate, stay in your room. Do not open it." The shadow paused as if listening. Then it stretched across the floor, sliding toward the gap at the bottom of her door, as though whoever or whatever was outside wanted to seep into her room. Kate's hand shook so violently she almost dropped the phone. She backed against the headboard, her eyes locked on the dark movement just beyond the thin wooden barrier. And then faintly, impossibly, the doorknob began to turn. The metallic rattle of the doorknob turning filled the room. Kate pressed herself harder against the headboard, clutching her phone to her ear. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice shaking. "It's trying to get in." On the other end of the line, her brother's voice was urgent. "Stay calm. Lock your door if you can. Don't make a sound." "I'm calling the police right now." Her bedroom door didn't have a proper lock, just an old brass handle and a latch that had never quite fit right. She knew it wouldn't hold. Still, she rushed forward, slammed the latch into place, and dragged her dresser against the door with trembling hands. The wood scraped loudly against the floor, echoing through the house. Silence followed. For a moment, she thought maybe she'd scared it off. Her breathing was ragged, but the shadow beneath the door had stilled. Then came the voice again, closer, clearer, as though it was leaning right against the thin wood. "Why are you locking me out, Kate? It's me. Don't you recognize your brother's voice?" It was perfect. Exactly Daniel's tone, his rhythm, even the small inflection he had when he was trying to calm her down. But on the phone, Daniel's real voice broke through, horrified. "Kate, that's not me. Do not believe it. Don't say a word to it." The knob rattled violently. The dresser shuddered as though someone pushed hard against it. The house itself seemed to groan. Kate covered her mouth to stifle a cry. And then quiet. The rattling stopped. The pacing shadow vanished from beneath the door. "Daniel," she whispered into the phone. "I'm still here," he said. "Help is coming. Stay hidden until—" He didn't finish. Because downstairs the front door creaked open. Kate's heart dropped. She knew she had locked it. She remembered sliding the bolt into place. Yet now she could hear the hinges whining, slow and deliberate, as though someone had just stepped inside. The floorboards groaned under invisible weight. One step, another. It was moving through the hallway toward the stairs. Daniel's voice came fast, panicked. "Kate, it's inside the house. Find somewhere to hide." Now, her gaze darted around the room. The closet, too obvious. Under the bed, too shallow. Her only chance was the small attic hatch above the corner of her ceiling. She dragged a chair beneath it, hands trembling as she pushed it into place, and climbed up. Her fingers fumbled with the wooden panel until it popped open. The stale air of the attic greeted her as she pulled herself inside, quietly lowering the panel back into place. Darkness swallowed her. Only the faint glow of her phone lit her face. She pressed it tight against her ear, muffling her breathing. Below her, the footsteps reached the top of the stairs. "Kate," the voice called again. But now it didn't sound coaxing. It was slower, stretched, as though something was trying to remember how to form the words. "I'm here." Boards creaked as it moved down the hallway, stopping outside her bedroom. She heard the crash of wood as the dresser was shoved aside like it weighed nothing. The door burst open. Silence stretched again. Kate's heart pounded so hard she was sure it would give her away. Through the thin ceiling, she heard movement, her bedsheets rustling, drawers opening, the sound of something sniffing, dragging. Then came the laugh. Low, wrong, like Daniel's voice fractured into too many layers. Her phone buzzed suddenly, a message from Daniel. Her hand shook as she opened it. It was a photo, time-stamped only a minute ago. It showed him sitting in his hotel room, wide awake, holding up a piece of paper with the words, "Police on their way. Stay hidden." The relief was short-lived, because from below, that voice spoke again, calm, confident, directly beneath the attic hatch. "You can't hide from family, Kate. You know I'll always find you." The wood beneath her hands trembled. Something was pressing upward against the attic panel, slowly, testing the weight. Her phone slipped in her sweaty palm. The light spilled out, faintly illuminating the cracks in the wood, and through those cracks, she saw an eye staring back at her. The highway stretched endlessly under the night sky, a dark ribbon lit only by the weak glow of the car's headlights. Kyle leaned forward, gripping the steering wheel a little too tightly, his eyes fixed on the yellow lines that divided the empty road. "Are you sure this is the right way?" Monica asked from the back seat, brushing her long hair behind her shoulder. She sounded exhausted, the kind of tired that made every word drag. David, who sat beside Kyle, checked the GPS on his phone and frowned. "Yeah, the motel should be up ahead in a few minutes. Says it's the only one for at least 50 miles. Kylie let out a dramatic sigh. "Great, just what I've always dreamed of. Spending the night in some cheap roadside horror movie motel." Her sarcasm didn't get much of a laugh. Everyone was too tired from the long drive. They had been on the road since morning, their spontaneous trip turning into something far more draining than they'd imagined. When the glowing neon sign finally appeared through the darkness, Kyle felt both relief and unease. The sign flickered. "Pinecrest Motel, vacancy." Half the letters buzzed faintly, casting a pale glow over the cracked parking lot. The four friends climbed out of the car, stretching stiff limbs. The night air was heavy and oddly still, with only the hum of insects breaking the silence. Inside, the motel lobby looked frozen in time, faded wallpaper, a dusty vending machine in the corner, and a front desk that had seen better days. An older man sat behind the counter, watching them approach with unreadable eyes. His name tag read simply, "Mr. Grady." "One room?" he asked, his voice flat, like he had repeated the question countless times. "Yes, please," David replied, stepping forward, "just for one night." Mr. Grady tapped a few keys on the ancient-looking computer before sliding a key across the counter. "Room 12. End of the hall." He paused, his gaze lingering on them in a way that made Monica shift uncomfortably. "Quiet night tonight. Shouldn't be any disturbances." Kyle wasn't sure why that last part sounded more like a warning than reassurance. Room 12 was exactly what they expected. 2 double beds with stiff mattresses, a faded carpet, and a faint smell of mildew that clung to the walls. Still, it was better than sleeping in the car. They threw their bags down and argued briefly over who would share which bed. Eventually, Monica and Kylie took one, leaving Kyle and David with the other. After brushing their teeth in the small yellow-lit bathroom, they collapsed into the creaky beds, exhaustion pulling them under almost instantly. But sometime deep into the night, Kyle stirred. At first, he thought it was a dream, a whisper that threaded through the edge of his sleep. Soft, lingering, calling. "Kyle." His eyes snapped open. The room was dark except for the faint glow of the parking lot lights sneaking through the thin curtains. He held his breath, straining his ears. Nothing. Just the sound of David's steady breathing beside him. Kyle shook his head and closed his eyes again. But then it came again. Kyle. This time, there was no mistaking it. The voice was right outside the door, low, coaxing. like someone was standing only inches away, speaking through the thin barrier of wood. Kyle sat up slowly, his heart thundering. He glanced at the others. Monica and Kylie were curled together on the other bed, fast asleep. David stirred a little but didn't wake. Kyle whispered, "Did you guys hear that?" No response. He swallowed hard and slid off the bed, his bare feet sinking into the scratchy carpet. Every instinct told him not to move closer, but curiosity, or maybe fear, pulled him toward the door. The voice came again, clearer now. "Kyle, come outside." His breath caught in his throat. Whoever it was knew his name. He forced himself to speak, though his voice came out shaky. "Who's there?" Silence. Then a soft knock on the door. 3 slow, deliberate taps. Kyle stumbled back, his chest tightening. He turned toward David, shaking him gently. "David, wake up. Someone's at the door." David groaned and cracked one eye open. "What are you talking about?" "There's someone calling my name," Kyle whispered urgently. They knocked. David sat up reluctantly, rubbing his face. He listened for a few seconds, the room sinking into absolute stillness. Nothing. "Kyle, there's nobody there," David muttered. "You're dreaming." "No, I wasn't," Kyle snapped, a little louder than he intended. "I heard it. They said my name. They asked me to come outside." This finally made Monica stir. "What's going on?" she mumbled, still half asleep. Kyle was trembling now, his words tumbling out in a rush. "Someone's out there. I swear, right outside the door. They keep saying my name." The 3 of them looked at him with a mixture of confusion and concern. But none of them had heard it. And then another knock, louder this time. 3 sharp raps. David froze. Monica sat up straight. Kylie whispered, "What the hell was that?" Kyle's face drained of color. "I told you." The knock echoed through the room like a drumbeat. Kyle stood frozen, staring at the door as if it might burst open at any second. David finally swung his legs out of bed and marched toward it. "All right, that's enough. Whoever you are, this isn't funny." But the second his hand touched the doorknob, Kyle's panic surged. "Don't open it," he hissed. David hesitated. "Why not?" "Because." Kyle swallowed, his throat dry. "It's not right. Whoever it is, they shouldn't know my name." The words lingered in the stale motel air. They all waited. No footsteps outside. No reply. Just silence stretching unbearably thin. Finally, David pulled his hand back, muttering something under his breath. The rest of the night passed in tense fragments. Every time Kyle closed his eyes, he swore he could hear faint whispers at the door, as if someone were crouched outside, endlessly repeating his name. The others drifted in and out of restless sleep, none of them daring to approach the door again. When pale morning light finally crept through the curtains, the group looked like they hadn't slept at all. Kyle's eyes were bloodshot. Monica rubbed her temples. Kylie refused to speak much, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. David tried to brush it off. Look, it was probably just some weirdo messing around. A drunk guy or some prank. Kyle shook his head. No, that wasn't. It didn't sound like that. It was. He struggled to find the right word. Wrong. Like they weren't even talking through the door. More like the door itself was saying my name. The others exchanged uneasy glances. They packed it up quickly, eager to get out. When they returned the key to the front desk, Mr. Grady looked up at them from behind the counter. His expression was unreadable, though his eyes lingered on Kyle a little too long. "Room 12, he said softly. "How'd you sleep?" David gave a half laugh. "Not great. Someone was knocking at our door all night." calling Kyle's name, real funny. At the mention of Kyle's name, Mr. Grady's face stiffened. His gaze sharpened in an unsettling way, like a crack spreading through glass. He leaned forward on the counter. "You heard a voice?" Kyle's stomach dropped. "Yes, more than once. And knocking, too." The lobby seemed colder all of a sudden. Mr. Grady sighed, his voice low and heavy. "I should have given you another room." The four friends froze. "Why?" Monica asked carefully. The old man looked past them, as if debating whether to speak at all. Finally, he lowered his voice. "Few years ago, we had a man stay in that room. Nice fellow. Kept to himself. Next morning, the maid found him dead, locked from the inside. No sign of a break-in." Kylie's voice trembled. "Dead? How?" Mr. Grady hesitated. "Throat cut. But here's the strange part. Nobody heard a struggle. No scream. Nothing. Just one thing. The folks in the room next door swore up and down that all night they kept hearing someone calling his name from outside his door. Over and over, just like you described. The words seemed to suck the air out of the room." Kyle's legs went weak. David tried to scoff, but it came out forced. "So what? You're saying it's haunted?" Mr. Grady's eyes narrowed. "I'm saying that sometimes people hear voices in that room, always calling them by name, and it doesn't end well for the ones who answer." The silence pressed down on them, heavier than the stale motel air. Finally, Monica whispered, "Let's go." They turned and walked quickly out of the lobby, the glass door creaking shut behind them. But as Kyle reached the parking lot, he froze. The car windows reflected the morning sun, but in the faint reflection, he thought he saw something move, a shadow standing just over his shoulder. And then, just beneath the noise of the cicadas, he heard it again. "Kyle," a whisper, faint, waiting. He spun around. No one was there, just the cracked pavement and the swaying trees. But deep inside, Kyle knew one thing with certainty. The voice wasn't finished with him. Steve and Amber had been searching for a place of their own for months. When they finally found the old apartment on Oak Ridge Street, it felt like a quiet victory. The building was aged, with cracked plaster along the stairwell and a lingering smell of dust and varnish in the halls. But the rent was surprisingly low, and the landlord assured them it was just a little outdated. Amber liked the tall ceilings and the way the wooden floor creaked beneath her shoes. Steve, ever the pragmatist, appreciated the location close to his work, close to the city, but tucked away on a quieter street. The two of them moved in on a gray Saturday afternoon, carrying boxes past the watchful eyes of elderly neighbors who peered from cracked doors. The first night was uneventful. They ordered takeout, drank cheap wine, and laughed about how the place looked like the set of some old black and white movie. The radiator clanked, pipes groaned, but those were the kind of harmless sounds every old building had. They fell asleep in their new bed, with the comfort of knowing they were beginning a new chapter together. It was the second night when everything began. Sometime after midnight, Amber stirred awake to the faintest sound outside their apartment door. At first, she thought it was a neighbor coming home late, fumbling with keys. But then the sound sharpened into words, low, almost tender, but strained. A woman's voice. "Open. Help me." Amber froze, her breath caught in her throat. She nudged Steve, whispering his name until he groggily turned toward her. "Someone's outside," she said, barely audible. Steve sat up, rubbed his face, and listened. At first, there was only silence. Then the whisper came again, closer this time, directly against their front door, like the speaker was leaning against it. "Open. Help me." Steve swung his legs off the bed and grabbed his phone. though the screen cast a weak glow in the dark. He walked quietly into the hallway, every creak of the old floor making Amber's chest tighten. At the door, he leaned down and peered through the peephole. Nothing. The corridor outside was dimly lit by a flickering bulb. It was empty still, but the voice hadn't stopped. It came again, as clear as before, even though the peephole revealed no one standing there. Steve's skin prickled. He stepped back, his pulse quickening, and locked the deadbolt with a deliberate click. He returned to the bedroom, where Amber sat upright, waiting. "No one's there," he said, "but I heard it too." They didn't sleep much after that. By morning, the whole thing felt unreal, like the aftertaste of a bad dream. Amber tried to dismiss it as a trick of fatigue, some odd carry of sound through the old walls. Steve wanted to believe the same. They made coffee, unpacked a few more boxes, and tried not to mention it again. But later that day, when Amber met their next-door neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Kearns, the conversation took a strange turn. "You're the new tenants," Mrs. Kearns said, her eyes narrowing. "Apartment 3B, yes?" Amber nodded, smiling politely. Mrs. Kearns hesitated, lowering her voice. "Strange things in that unit. You should know. The girl before you, she didn't last long, poor thing." Amber's stomach tightened. What happened to her? They said she had an accident. But before that, Mrs. Kearns glanced down the hallway as if afraid someone might overhear. "She told me about the whispers, always behind the door, a woman's voice asking to be let in." Amber felt her mouth go dry. "We heard something last night," she admitted before she could stop herself. Mrs. Kearns gave a grim nod, as though she had expected the answer. "That building is old. Too old. Some things linger here." She clutched her shopping bag and shuffled away without another word. That night, Steve tried to laugh it off. Probably some prank. Someone messing with us, maybe a neighbor with a weird sense of humor. But Amber wasn't so sure. She kept glancing toward the door, as though expecting to hear it again. And, as the hours crawled toward midnight, she did. "Open, help me." The same pleading, the same fragile whisper. Steve went to the peephole again, and once more it was empty. This time, though, something strange happened. As he leaned closer, straining to see, the whisper didn't just come from the other side. It seemed to seep through the door, curling into his ear like breath, as though the speaker were standing right behind him. He jerked back, heart racing. Amber called out from the bedroom. "Steve, there's no one there," he said, forcing his voice steady. But even as he said it, he felt a chill in his chest, as if the apartment itself was listening. The following morning, Steve asked the landlord directly about the previous tenant. The landlord hesitated, adjusting his tie nervously before muttering, "She passed away." "Very unfortunate." "How?" Steve pressed. "Fall. Down the stairs." The landlord's eyes darted away. "Tragic. She was very young." Steve didn't believe him. The way the landlord's voice tightened, the way his hands fidgeted, it all felt rehearsed. When he returned to tell Amber, she only nodded slowly. Mrs. Kearns said people heard the voice even before the last girl died. What if it's something that doesn't stop? Steve wanted to reassure her, to tell her it was all nonsense, but the words never came. That night, the voice returned, and this time, it didn't stay by the door. The third night was worse. They had gone to bed earlier than usual, both of them too tired to argue about what was real and what wasn't. Amber clutched the blanket up to her chin, listening for every sound. Steve lay beside her, stiff and restless. When the whisper finally came, it was softer, slower, almost coaxing. "Open. Please, let me in." Amber squeezed her eyes shut. Steve sat up, jaw tight, and walked toward the door again. He knew what he'd find, or rather, what he wouldn't. But this time, before he even reached the door, the voice shifted. It wasn't just outside anymore. It slithered along the walls, pressed through the cracks of the old apartment, circling them like smoke. Amber bolted upright. "It's in here," she whispered. Steve grabbed the nearest object, an old umbrella, and stood there like it might help against something unseen. The whisper moved, now right at the bedroom door, as though whoever it was had already stepped inside. "Help me." The words stretched, frayed, almost sighing. Then silence. The apartment seemed to collapse back into stillness, leaving only the pounding of their hearts. Neither of them slept until dawn. The next day, Amber refused to stay alone in the apartment. They went out together, walking the city streets, trying to convince themselves the fresh air and sunlight could dissolve what they had heard. But Amber couldn't shake it. "It's not a prank," she said firmly. "It's not. No one's there, Steve. You saw it yourself." Steve didn't argue. He was pale, quiet, his eyes shadowed. He hadn't told her that when he'd looked through the peephole the night before, the corridor hadn't been entirely empty. For a moment, fleeting but certain, he thought he had seen a shadow leaning against the wall opposite the door, slim, hunched, as though waiting. But when he blinked, it vanished. On the fourth night, the voice returned with a rhythm that was almost patient. It no longer begged in broken whispers. It repeated again and again, "Open, help me." Sometimes the words stretched into a moan. Sometimes they fell into a whisper so faint they were almost part of the silence itself. And then, sometime after 3 in the morning, Amber did something Steve hadn't expected. She moved toward the door. "Amber," Steve hissed, grabbing her wrist. "Don't." Her eyes were wide, unfocused. "She needs help. Can't you hear it? She's trapped. Steve pulled her back, his grip trembling. "No one is there." Amber stared at him like he was lying. Like he was the one refusing to see the obvious. She didn't resist, but she didn't speak again either. The next day, Steve confronted Mrs. Kearns again, desperate for answers. She wasn't the first, the old woman told him, eyes darting nervously around the hall. That apartment has history. A girl before the last, one long before she vanished. Police never found her. People said she left in the middle of the night, but I heard things. The whispers. Always the whispers. Steve pressed. "What do they want?" Mrs. Kearns shook her head. "Not want. Need. They ask for the door to open, but once you let them in." She stopped herself, lips tightening. "Don't let them in." That night, Steve and Amber argued. He wanted to leave the apartment immediately, break the lease if they had to. Amber, though frightened, resisted. "If we leave, it'll follow us," she said. "I can feel it." "It's not this place, it's her." Steve didn't answer, but the thought haunted him. The 5th night, Steve awoke to the sound of the lock turning. He shot upright. Amber was standing at the door, her hand on the deadbolt, her eyes glassy with exhaustion. "Amber." He lunged forward, pulling her hand away just as the lock clicked halfway. The whisper on the other side turned sharp, almost angry. "Open, open." The doorknob rattled violently, though no one was there. Amber screamed, and Steve dragged her back toward the bedroom, slamming the door shut. The rattling stopped only after minutes that felt like hours. By dawn, Amber was shivering, pale as paper. She whispered one phrase over and over. "She doesn't want help. She wants us." Steve didn't know how she knew, but he believed her. On the 6th night, the voice didn't wait for midnight. It began at dusk, slipping into their ears before the last light of day had faded. The words stretched, fractured, multiplying. It was no longer just one voice. It was several, overlapping, each one begging, demanding, whispering through the walls. "Open, open, help." "Let me in." The sound pressed into their apartment from every direction, filling it until Steve thought the very walls were breathing. He held Amber's hand tightly, but she wouldn't look at him. She was staring at the door, her lips moving in silent reply as though answering the voices. And then, as suddenly as it began, the whisper stopped. The silence was unbearable. Steve, shaking, forced himself to the peephole. The corridor was dark, the bulb burned out. But this time, there was something. A woman's face, inches from the door. Pale, eyes wide, lips pressed into a whisper he could still hear, even without sound. He stumbled back, nearly dropping to his knees. Amber was already moving toward the door again. "Amber, no!" But she was stronger than he expected, fueled by something beyond her control. She reached the lock before he could stop her. The deadbolt clicked. The door opened a fraction. And the whispering flooded in, not through cracks or wood or air, but as if the building itself exhaled them into the room. The door slammed shut on its own. In the morning, neighbors would later say they heard nothing unusual, only the faint sound of voices they assumed was the television. But apartment 3B stayed silent. When the landlord tried to contact Steve and Amber, there was no reply. Days later, the apartment was empty again. No trace of the couple, only the faint, impossible sound that still lingered by the door at night. Opened. "Help me,"